Section 2 Bitcoin's carbon emissions. Summary. Bitcoin's absolute electricity consumption and carbon emissions are not significant in global terms, representing 0.04% of global primary energy consumption, 0.2% of global electricity generation, and 0.1% of global carbon emissions. Bitcoin mining is electricity-intensive by design to provide security to the network. The electricity consumption of Bitcoin mining is estimated using a bottom-up approach, based on network hash rate and machine efficiency. We estimate that Bitcoin mining consumed 62 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2020. This increased to an annualized rate of 92 terawatt-hours in March 2021, before falling to 49 terawatt-hours in July following the Chinese crackdown on mining. Bitcoin's carbon emissions are primarily driven by the carbon intensity of miners' electricity mix and their electricity consumption. We estimate that Bitcoin mining resulted in total emissions of 33 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2020. In line with the electricity consumption, emissions reached an annualized peak of 49 million tons of carbon dioxide in March 2021 but dropped to 27 million tons of carbon dioxide in July. Bitcoin's absolute carbon emissions are low compared both to other innovations that are energy-intensive, such as aviation transport and air conditioning, and to major mined products. 2.1 How do Bitcoin's electricity consumption and emissions compare globally? Bitcoin's absolute electricity consumption and carbon emissions are not significant in global terms, representing 0.04% of global primary energy consumption, 0.2% of global electricity generation, and 0.1% of global carbon emissions. Global energy consumption, carbon emissions and electricity generation. Energy can be classified into two broad types: non-renewable and renewable. Non-renewable energy sources include coal, oil, and natural gas, which are fossil fuels, as well as the raw material used to create nuclear energy. Renewable energy sources include hydro, solar, wind, and geothermal. Since the Industrial Revolution, annual global primary energy consumption has increased dramatically, from around 6,000 terawatt-hours in 1800 to more than 170,000 terawatt-hours in 2019. This increase has been accompanied by a similar rise in global emissions, increasing from around 30 million tons of carbon dioxide per year in 1800 to around 36,000 million in 2019. In the International Energy Authority's Sustainability Development Scenario, global carbon emissions rapidly decrease, falling to 15,000 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2040. Primary energy consumption refers to all uses of unconverted fuel, including for transport, heating, and the generation of electricity. In 2019, global electricity generation was around 27,000 terawatt-hours. It was used for purposes including lighting, heating, cooling, and refrigeration, as well as to operate household appliances, computers, machinery, and transport systems. In the IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario, global electricity generation increases to around 39,000 terawatt-hours by 2040. Bitcoin's electricity consumption and carbon emissions are not significant in global terms. Its estimated electricity consumption of 62 terawatt-hours in 2020 represented just 0.04% of the global primary energy consumption of 170,000 terawatt-hours and 0.2% of the global electricity generation of 27,000 terawatt-hours. Bitcoin's carbon emissions were 33 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2020, or 0.1% of the global total of 36,000 million tons of carbon dioxide. In the future, under a wide range of Bitcoin price scenarios, Bitcoin's electricity consumption and carbon emissions will remain a small proportion of global totals. Even under our highest price scenario, where Bitcoin's electricity consumption and carbon emissions peak at 706 terawatt-hours and 234 million tons of carbon dioxide, this only accounts for 0.4% of global primary energy consumption, 2.0% of electricity generation, and 0.9% of carbon emissions. Electricity grid and renewables. Traditionally, electricity has been generated in large central power plants, fueled by either coal, natural gas, nuclear reactors, or water. This electricity is transported initially through the transmission network at very high voltages, before being distributed to customers through local distribution networks at lower voltages. Together, these networks are termed the grid. This process wastes significant energy. Only around 40% of the energy content of coal is converted into electricity. The rest is lost as waste heat. Natural gas is more efficient, but still at best 60% of its energy content is converted. Furthermore, between 4 and 10% of electricity generated is then lost as heat in the transmission and distribution networks. In total, around 50,000 terawatt-hours of energy is wasted every year due to inefficiencies. Bitcoin's electricity consumption is equivalent to just 0.1% of this annual waste. The global share of electricity generated from renewables, which includes hydro, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass and marine energy, increased from 20% in 2010 to 27% in 2019. This rise was driven by declining costs, especially of solar and wind energy, plus growing demand resulting from increasing environmental concerns. Using renewable sources instead of fossil fuels significantly lowers the carbon emissions associated with electricity generation. Renewables are expected to grow rapidly in the future, as their costs continue to decline, and environmental concerns persist. This trend may ultimately lead to the decarbonization of electricity grids. In the IEA 2020 Sustainable Development Scenario, renewables reach a share of 52% in 2030 and 72% in 2040, as coal, gas, and oil are gradually phased out. Further growth in renewables would be required to achieve a net zero world, in which there is a balance between the amount of carbon dioxide emitted and the amount removed from the atmosphere. However, solar and wind only generate electricity in the right weather conditions, when the sun shines and the wind blows, unlike fossil fuel plants, which can produce electricity on demand. Therefore, at times, fossil fuel plants are needed to fulfill electricity demand that renewables cannot meet. At times, renewables can also supply more electricity than is needed. As excess electricity cannot be easily stored, generation must be curtailed by deliberately reducing the output of a generator below its full potential in order to balance supply with demand from the grid. In the future, these problems might be solved through battery storage. But today batteries are expensive, particularly if the electricity generated needs to be stored for more than a few hours. Currently, therefore, fossil fuels are needed alongside renewables to ensure that the supply of electricity can meet demand. At any given time, a grid typically transmits electricity generated from a mix of fossil fuels, nuclear energy, and renewables. Carbon emissions per unit of electricity produced will therefore vary according to the specific mix, which will change over time. A grid's carbon intensity is typically measured in grams of Colorado-2 per kilowatt-hour of electricity produced. Carbon intensity levels can reach up to 1,000 gCO2 per kilowatt-hour for coal or about 400 gCO2 per kilowatt-hour for gas, but are 0 gCO2 per kilowatt-hour for renewables and nuclear energy. In many countries, coal remains the dominant source of electricity. China, for example, produced 65% of its electricity from coal in 2019. In other countries, gas is the dominant source. Russia produced 49% of its electricity from gas in 2019 and the US 38%. In Europe, renewables are the biggest source, at 37% in 2019. It is not technically possible for a customer to buy only renewable electricity from a grid, because the electricity supplied reflects the mix of fuels that feed it. Moreover, electricity markets, where electricity is bought and sold by consumers and generators, are becoming increasingly interconnected, so it is more difficult to trace electricity supply to a local region. As a result, carbon intensity has become reflective of the electricity mix across a continent or region rather than a specific country. For example, most markets in Europe now operate in combination with one another, and countries are usually importing or exporting electricity at any point in time. To encourage the adoption of renewables, many electricity markets have adopted renewable energy certification programs. Under these, renewable generators earn certificates for each megawatt-hour of electricity generated from a renewable energy source, demonstrating that they have supplied a specific volume of renewable electricity to the grid. They can then sell these certificates to energy consumers, who use them to demonstrate that they have effectively purchased electricity generated from a renewable source. The certificates can be purchased either together with the physical energy generated by the renewable sources or separately. Through programs such as this, high electricity consumption does not necessarily translate into high carbon emissions. Box 1. Renewable energy costs. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, the costs of renewables have declined dramatically due to improving technologies, economies of scale, increasingly competitive supply chains, and growing developer experience. The decline has been most significant for electricity generated by solar and wind electricity. Between 2010 and 2019, the global weighted average levelized cost of electricity, a measure of the lifetime cost of generating electricity, fell by 82% for utility-scale solar photovoltaics, 38% for onshore wind, and 29% for offshore wind. Auction prices have shown continued declines in these costs in 2020 and 2021, although the rate of decline is decreasing as technologies mature. As a result, renewable energy generation technologies have become cost-competitive with conventional fossil fuel generation and have become a low-cost option for new installed capacity in most countries, spurring their growth over the past decade. 2.2 Why is Bitcoin mining electricity intensive? Bitcoin mining is electricity intensive by design to provide security to the network. The Bitcoin ecosystem consists of several entities, including the following: mining nodes, which create new blocks; non-mining nodes, which validate the entire history of the blockchain and double-check transaction validity in real time; and third-party exchanges and custodians, which conduct transactions and store Bitcoin on behalf of users who choose not to own the asset directly. This report focuses exclusively on the electricity consumption of Bitcoin mining, as the consumption of other parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem is negligible. Bitcoin mining has become more electricity intensive as the value of Bitcoin has risen. Miners compete to receive Bitcoin rewards for finding the solution to random puzzles set by the Bitcoin protocol. Therefore, as the value of Bitcoin has risen, so has the level of competition. Miners compete by increasing their computational capacity, which then requires greater amounts of electricity. This requirement to expend electricity to solve the mathematical problems is essential to the proof of work mechanism. As proof of work is reliant on computational work, it is also a way to attach a real-world cost to blocks. This provides security to the network by making it costly, both in terms of electricity and mining hardware, for a potential malicious actor to gain control of the network and add fraudulent blocks to the blockchain. 2.3 What is the electricity consumption of Bitcoin mining? The electricity consumption of Bitcoin mining is estimated using a bottom-up approach, based on network hash rate and machine efficiency. We estimate that Bitcoin mining consumed 62 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2020, equivalent to 0.04% of global primary energy consumption and 0.2% of global electricity generation. This increased to an annualized rate of 92 terawatt-hours in March 2021, before falling to 49 terawatt-hours in July following the crackdown on mining. Methodology. Our calculation of the historical electricity consumption of Bitcoin miners is a function of the network hash rate and machine efficiency. These enable the average electricity required per hash to be derived. The network hash rate is publicly available and is measured in terahashes per second, or 10 to the power of 12 calculations per second. It has risen rapidly since 2018 with the development of faster machines and the increasing attraction of mining with the rising Bitcoin price. The recent crackdown on mining in China has driven the recent rapid fall in hash rate. The average amount of electricity required per hash is determined by the average energy efficiency of mining machines on the network, weighted by their share of the hash rate. It is measured in joules per terahash. We have assumed that the 93 machine classes referenced in a study by the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance are representative of the mining machine market from 2015 to 2021. As the energy efficiency of each machine class is known, the only unknown variable is the distribution of network hash rate across these machine classes over time. This is needed to determine a weighted average energy efficiency of all mining machines for a given period. To determine the distribution through time of network hash rate by machine class, we modeled a typical lifespan for each machine class. This was based on factors including release date, calculated retirement date, efficiency, and hash rate. The lifespan parameter of each machine class was refined further, by assuming that machines of a particular class will never be used on days when the electricity cost per hash is greater than the average revenue per hash, that is, when the machine is unprofitable. External reference points were also used to further calibrate the lifespan parameter, such as sales figures from listed hardware manufacturers and data signatures within mined blocks. For any given day, we were then able to compare the progress of each machine class along its lifespan and thus generate a distribution of hash rate. That yielded a weighted average energy efficiency of the mining machines on the network. This, when combined with the known hash rate, allowed us to estimate the electricity consumed by Bitcoin mining machines on any given day. Bitcoin mining operations, like data centers, generally use more electricity than required to simply run their machines, mostly because of the need for cooling and other IT equipment. The mining companies we interviewed suggested that electricity usage not associated with running the mining machines amounts to approximately 7.5% of the energy required to run the machines themselves. This gives a power usage effectiveness of 1.075, which is the ratio of the total electricity supplied to that required to run the mining machines. After multiplying our electricity consumption estimates by the Pew of 1.075, we calculated the daily electricity consumption for global Bitcoin mining operations on any given day. Results. The weighted average energy efficiency of mining machines on the network improved significantly from 2016 to 2020 in line with the development and release of more efficient machines. Despite the general trend of rising Bitcoin prices from 2016 to early 2021, the rapid increase in hash rate, combined with the continued halving of the block subsidy, led to a decrease in miner revenue per terahash over this period. As a result, the profitability of older, less efficient machines has been eroded, and they have been replaced by newer, more efficient machines. This substantially increased the average energy efficiency of mining hardware from 2016 to 2020. The mining companies we interviewed suggested that a typical class of machine in 2021 has a lifespan of about 3 or 4 years, after which it is replaced by more powerful and more efficient models. The rise in Bitcoin's price and the consequent demand for machines over the past decade have led hardware manufacturers to invest in producing more efficient microchips for these machines. Historically, and in line with Moore's law, chip efficiency has doubled approximately every 2 years. However, this has slowed in recent years and looks likely to continue to slow to a doubling every 3 to 4 years, likely increasing the lifespan of each machine class. Nevertheless, some older machines could be switched back on if increases in the Bitcoin price make them profitable. Our model, together with data signatures from mined blocks, has verified this in the case of the Antminer S9, one of the most popular mining machines in 2018. Its share of hash rate began to decline in 2020 as it approached the end of its lifespan, but then spiked in early 2021 as the price of Bitcoin rose. The electricity consumption of Bitcoin mining remained relatively low until late 2017, when the first jump in Bitcoin's price attracted a wider community of miners. After that, more miners competed to solve the mathematical problems, and the hash rate and electricity consumption grew rapidly, reaching 62 terawatt-hours in 2020. That was equivalent to 0.04% of global primary energy consumption and 0.2% of global electricity generation. Bitcoin's electricity consumption in 2021 has been highly volatile. The rise in price in early 2021 drove up annualized consumption to a peak of 92 terawatt-hours in March 2021. However, the Chinese crackdown on mining in May and June 2021 drove large numbers of miners off the system, reducing the global network hash rate. Consequently, annualized July electricity consumption dropped to 49 terawatt-hours. Box 2. Evolution of Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining has evolved over the past decade from a small-scale activity possible on personal computers to large-scale mining farms. Similar in appearance to a data center, a mining farm consists of racks of specialized energy-efficient computer rigs, which perform hashes to solve the complex mathematical problems. Over the past decade, these machines have undergone rapid technological development. Initially, it was possible for an average central processing unit or graphics processing unit graphics card to mine Bitcoin because of the low amount of computing capability on the network. There were fewer mining machines than today. Equipment was relatively unadvanced, and the mathematical problems set were correspondingly less complex. In 2013, large-scale miners began to use application-specific integrated circuits designed for Bitcoin mining. These chips can help mine Bitcoin at a faster rate and using far less electricity than a traditional PC CPU unit. Since their launch, ASIC chip performance has continued to rapidly improve, increasing both their capacity and energy efficiency. To maximize their revenues, miners aim to run their machines 24/7. This typically requires connection to the grid, since it provides a constant supply of electricity, and independent renewable sources only produce electricity intermittently. To maximize their operating profits, miners aim to run the most efficient machines possible, as this reduces their energy cost per hash. Box 3. Chinese crackdown on mining. the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance has estimated that in 2020, 65% of Bitcoin mining took place in China. In April 2021, it reported a substantially lower proportion of 45%, as the U.S. became the dominant buyer of the most powerful mining hardware. However, in May and June 2021, various Chinese state-backed bodies at the provincial and national levels announced a series of measures to restrict Bitcoin activities. At the national level, 3 Chinese industry groups overseeing the financial sector warned their members across the nation to stay clear of any financing, exchange or trading activities related to cryptocurrencies. At the provincial level, numerous Chinese states have also announced restrictions on cryptocurrency activity. Some of these have been cautionary announcements. Beijing said it would clamp down on Bitcoin mining and trading behavior, and Inner Mongolia issued a draft guideline explaining how local authorities can crack down on Bitcoin mining. Other states have been stronger in policing crypto activity. Sichuan ordered the suspension of the 26 largest mining farms, telling them to leave the country by September 2021, and Qinghai barred local officials from setting up or permitting crypto mining projects. These announcements have precipitated an exodus of miners from China. As a result, the global hash rate decreased by more than half, from 190 exahash per second on the 9th of May 2021 to 90 exahash per second on the 3rd of July 2021. This 53% decrease corroborates the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance's initial estimate that more than half the hash rate had previously been in China. While a justification for the Chinese crackdown has not been publicly announced, governments across the world are increasingly viewing Bitcoin as a threat to state monetary sovereignty. For example, Nigeria and Qatar have also taken steps to limit Bitcoin trading and Bitcoin transactions. In the future, a Bitcoin-friendly political environment will be critical for stable mining operations. 2.4 What carbon emissions have resulted from historical electricity consumption? Bitcoin's carbon emissions are primarily driven by the carbon intensity of miners' electricity mix and their electricity consumption. We estimate that Bitcoin mining resulted in total emissions of 33 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2020, equivalent to 0.1% of the global total. In line with electricity consumption, annualized carbon emissions peaked at 49 million tons of carbon dioxide in March 2021 but dropped to 27 million tons of carbon dioxide in July. Methodology. Estimating the carbon emissions from Bitcoin mining requires knowledge of its location and of the carbon intensity of the local electricity market. In 2020 and early 2021, most Bitcoin mining took place in China. The government crackdown in May and June 2021 then significantly reduced the Chinese share of hash rate. The newer, more economically viable, mining machines in China are likely to be exported to new locations, while older, less profitable machines are likely to be retired. This section assesses the historical emissions of Bitcoin, both before and immediately after the Chinese crackdown. Later, Section 3.2 discusses where Bitcoin miners are expected to be located in the future. In most cases, we have assumed that Bitcoin miners run their mining rigs on electricity from the local grid. Though some mining companies have announced future direct partnerships with power stations, we found limited evidence of Bitcoin miners running their operations on fully off-grid electricity, that is, obtaining all their electricity directly from a power station not connected to a grid. Therefore, our methodology relies on the assumptions that all Bitcoin miners used electricity from their local grids, and that the carbon intensity of their electricity reflects those grids' mixes. Our methodology does not factor in miner-specific abatement measures, such as carbon offsets and direct renewable electricity procurement. Therefore, our carbon assessment can be interpreted as a baseline estimate for the industry before action. Our primary dataset, from the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, segmented hash rate to a national level except China where data is collected at a provincial level. This allowed us to capture the annual migration of miners to areas rich in hydroelectric power during the wet season, a common practice before the government crackdown. According to this data, until the end of 2020, up to 65% of Bitcoin mining occurred in China, a figure that has been corroborated by the aftermath of the government crackdown. Within China, most mining occurred in Xinjiang and Sichuan. The other top countries for Bitcoin mining were Russia, 6.9%, United States, 6.7%, Malaysia, 4.8%, Kazakhstan, 4.6%, and Iran, 3.3%. To estimate the geographic distribution of hash rate in July 2021, immediately after the Chinese crackdown, we excluded China and used the same distribution among other countries as published by the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance for the month of April 2021. In April 2021, there had already been a significant decrease in hash rate in China and a proportional increase in the US, which dominated purchases of mining hardware during the first half of 2021. This resulted in the following distribution of hash rate for the top locations: United States, 31%, Russia, 13%, Kazakhstan, 15%, Malaysia, 6%, and Iran, 9%. Results. We estimate that Bitcoin's 2020 electricity consumption of 62 terawatt-hours resulted in total emissions of 33 million tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to 0.1% of the global total. Over the lifetime of Bitcoin, that is, from 2009 to 2020, we estimate that mining has caused aggregate emissions of 96 million tons of carbon dioxide. Bitcoin emissions from 2009 to 2014 were markedly low, largely due to the low price environment and correspondingly low hash rate, which required fewer calculations and less energy to add a block to the blockchain. As with electricity consumption, Bitcoin's carbon emissions in 2021 have been highly volatile. They reached an annualized peak of 49 million tons of carbon dioxide in March 2021 but fell to 27 million tons of carbon dioxide in July following the Chinese crackdown on mining. This reduction is primarily a result of the reduced global hash rate. If the hash rate remains at these reduced levels for the remainder of 2021, then carbon emissions from Bitcoin mining in 2021 will be lower than they were in 2020. In modeling Bitcoin's 2020 electricity consumption and carbon emissions, we made several baseline assumptions. These are listed in Table 2, along with a lower bound and upper bound for each assumption and their implication on our results. Our model is most sensitive to the average energy efficiency of mining machines, which we derived from the distribution of hash rate across machines. However, at most this has an impact of between 23% and plus 10% on our estimate for 2020 carbon emissions. 2.5 How does Bitcoin compare to other innovations and commodities? Bitcoin's carbon emissions are low compared both to other innovations that are energy-intensive, such as aviation and marine transport, air conditioning, and to major mined products. Bitcoin's absolute electricity consumption and carbon emissions are far less than those of other innovations that are energy-intensive but generally perceived to be valid uses of that energy given their societal utility. Energy consumption from marine and air transport are significant, eclipsing Bitcoin mining's electricity consumption by factors of 49 and 65 respectively. Bitcoin's 2020 carbon emissions of 33 million tons of carbon dioxide were also significantly less than those for the extraction and production of zinc, copper, aluminum, and steel. Emissions from gold production were estimated to be equivalent to around 101 million tons of carbon dioxide, more than 3 times Bitcoin's emissions.